From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
Thank you, darling. Now, you could be forgiven for thinking there is only one human being on all of planet Earth. Certainly, the media is rather obsessed with at least one human being who kind of makes it feel like she's the only person in the world. You know who I'm talking about.
Taylor Swift.
Taylor Swift. Taylor Swift. Taylor Swift.
Taylor Swift.
So much of it. Right, now, I've got a little girl, I've got two little girls, and they love Tay-Tay, right? So I'm completely across all the joys that are Taylor Swift, all right? They're not going to be going to these concerts, they're too young. When she comes back, whenever, they'll get their chance to do it. But, the reason I start the show with this tonight is there was perhaps the dumbest opinion poll I've ever seen, but it was done by some people who I kind of trust their polling, which says 79% of Australians are not interested in Taylor Swift and don't even know who she is. So if you are somebody who is sitting back going, who, what, it's okay. 80% of the country's with you, right? Now, I get it. For the 20% that are in, they're all in, all right? But how's this? 66% of 18 to 34-year-olds are not interested or have never heard of her. 75% of people between 35 and 55, no idea who she is, or don't want to go and see her, and 94% of people over the age of 55. So relax, you are in the majority if you are, well, a little blank space, dare I say, about Tay-Tay and what's going to be coming in the next little while. But I get it, it's a big thing, and the people that are into her, they're in, but just relax. But there's more detail from that polling organisation I'll get to right now. Now, as we know, the Prime Minister has apparently won the battle when it comes to the too little too late tax cuts. He's won the battle when it comes to the breaking of promises. And how do we know that? Well, because people in the press gallery have been telling us, like Laura Tingle over there at Channel 2, who was telling us that what looked like bad politics in the end was genius politics, as she wrote in the AFR, that media theatrics over stage 3 tax cuts obscure a good policy choice. And the same people who did the Tay-Tay poll, well, they were out there last week telling everyone that 1 in 2 voters back the stage 3 tax cut changes. But of course, there's one question that no polling joint bothered to ask because, as we often talk about, many people in the media are about narrative, good guys, bad guys, winners, losers, the packa-wacka resuscitation of the Prime Minister who was sputtering like a clap that old car at the end of the year. But finally, somebody has actually done a poll about how do Australians feel about breaking election promises. Well, the Essential Media organisation that published in the Turnbull Times, the very same people that were trying to turn around and tell us that 1 in 2 were okay with it, well, guess what? 53% of Australians say, and I quote, "It is never acceptable to break an election promise." Never acceptable. So what we're going to learn in the next couple of minutes is the great gulf between those that talk about things in the Canberra bubble, those of us that try to pop the Canberra bubble each and every night, and the extreme majority of people who will eventually work out that despite the spin, despite all of the cheering on of the government, it is too little, too late when it comes to actually doing anything about cost of living. But interestingly here, let's have a look at on party breakdown where people are about broken promises. Now, here, Labor people, 60-40, say it's okay to change your positions depending on the circumstances. 62% of coalition voters say no, hell no, there's never a good reason to break an election promise. 52% of Greens say it's okay. But 59% of people who are independents or third-party voters, and these are often the people whose preferences get to decide elections, they say, by a margin of almost, 6-4 there, 60% to 40%, that no, it's not okay. Interestingly, when you break it down by gender, there is one group in particular who do not like broken promises, and it's ladies. While 52% of blokes say, yeah, okay, we get it if circumstances change, 58% of women have told The Guardian today that under no circumstances can you break a promise. Now, also what is interesting here is the assumption being that, remember, the narrative is all women are leaning left and therefore all women are going to agree with the lies that come out of the Prime Minister. Well, apparently young people too, supposedly, they couldn't care less about these things. They're the ones that are the... No, oh, that's right. 60% of 18 to 34-year-olds say it is never acceptable to break an election promise. 55% of people between 35 and 54, now those two demographics are the majority of the electorate, say it is never acceptable to break a promise. 53% of people over the age of 55. But as we know, there has been nothing but this conversation since the parliamentary year started. It was the entire ramp-up of the week to Australia Day, and it dominated the first week back in Parliament. So much so now that there's barely conversation about it that happens in question time. And the media, of course, has done their best to sell the government's version of this story.
Tax cuts.
Tax cut. Tax cuts.
Tax cuts.
Tax cuts.
But here's a little dose of reality. Certainly for those of us that talk about politics all the time, for people who like to watch politics all the time, and for the media who think that what they say goes. 53% of Australians apparently know very little or absolutely nothing about this policy. They don't know why, they don't know who wins, they don't know who loses, they don't know how much it is. 53%. And again, have a look at the age breakdowns here, where more than half of 18 to 34-year-olds, more than half of 35 to 54-year-olds know hardly anything or nothing at all about the tax cuts. Even a majority of people over the age of 55 know hardly anything or nothing at all. So perhaps the Prime Minister is not in gravy right now. Perhaps he is not through the worst of it. Because while he will be saying, I've done something about cost of living, remember the talking point to Labor MPs was that this was the solution to cost of living. Well, I'll give you the tip. When the majority of people start looking at their pay packet per week, per fortnight or per month, they're going to work out too little, too late. $15 a week is how little this thing can end up. Or for the mean income earners of Dunkley, it's $14 a week. Yeah, good luck taking that to the by-election saying tax cut, tax cut, tax cut. How much? $14 a week. And of course, none of that touches the size if you're paying off a house, like most of the people are in Dunkley. You need an extra $14,500 to pay off a $500,000 mortgage since this bloke became Prime Minister. $21,000 for $750,000 owed, or $1 million above. $29,000 that you were not paying to pay off your home before this bloke became the Prime Minister. So fascinating to see. Despite all of the conversation, the obsession, the who's winning, the who's losing, most people have no idea about the detail, which means I'm going to bet when they start to see the dollars, they're going to go, what? That's if they notice it at all. So perhaps the Canberra bubble may not have been able to protect the Prime Minister from too little, too late. One more thing about these polls too, which show us where the primary vote is for the parties, and the likelihood is that if the Labor Party wins Dunkley, which at this stage it seems they probably will, despite all the obvious reasons why the people of Dunkley should be sending a message about the too little too late from this government, the ALP has a primary vote of just 31%. That is down, by the way, from the last federal election where they only just got there. The Liberal Party is at 34%. Now, they really need to be above 35. To be honest, they need to be at about 37 and above to be able to start thinking about forming a government. So again, we're talking about most likely a minority government. But there's one number that all of us should be afraid of because we all watch the policies and the personalities of the Greens. Their vote is up to 14%, and 28% of 18 to 34-year-olds currently plan to vote Green. Now, this matters because, of course, Green preferences help get Labor MPs elected, but if there is a surge in Green votes, they will end up with a higher primary number in some places than Labor, and the preferences will work for the Greens, which means you'll have examples like what happened in the seat of Brisbane at the last federal election, where it went from the Liberal Party to the Greens. Labor's preferences ended up propping up the Greens. And to give you an idea of why the Greens are in a position to be able to start to grow their vote despite their insanity, and I get it, there is one constituency that if the Greens can get just a portion of this group, they will lift their primary vote, and that is renters. Now, according to the census from a couple of years ago, pretty simple. 31% own their house outright, 35% have a mortgage, and 30% of people are renting. The queues that are currently there, that no one is going to be able to solve before the next federal election, all are potential Green voters who are promising solutions to a problem that they won't be able to solve. But if grievance becomes a reason for people to not vote for the government, then for many people they will be looking to the left and the Greens. Now, they know they're nutty, they know they disagree with them on a whole bunch of other things, but if they are seen to be the only party that cares about renters, well, then they're going to end up getting the vote. So my suggestion is to both of the major parties, but obviously the right of centre ones that we would prefer to end up having the power because they are, frankly, either less insane or more sane than the current mob that's currently there. They have to come up with serious policies for renters. Now, it's not just about the idea, as previously has been the logic inside the Liberal Party, that every renter is somebody who's dreaming of owning a home, so let's try and do everything we can to create policies to buy your first home. For many people in Australia, they're nowhere near having the deposit to buy the house, so their circumstances as renters matters. I've got some ideas that I think could help try to reach out to renters, and we'll talk about those in the coming weeks and months. But if anyone thinks that the rental issue is just something that really doesn't matter, it's a third, potentially, of the electorate. And if the Greens are just 15%, if they're able to get to 16, 17 or even 18% in certain seats, they will leapfrog Labor. And Labor's minority that they will get out of the next election will mean they'll have to go begging, probably to the Greens, even though they think they'll be able to go lots of other independents and Teals before they get to Greens. I'm not saying I like it, I'm just saying follow the data. Meantime, horrible day in Victoria, which is still playing out right now. It has been incredibly hot in parts of the state today. There were bushfires. To everyone and anyone affected, we send you nothing but strength and love. Then there was a mega hailstorm. Lots of videos of this on social media. As we speak right now, hundreds of thousands of people sitting in darkness, including a fair amount of them that are sitting in Dunkley. But of course, we know that one of the reasons why this is the case is because there's issues right now with one of the few remaining coal-fired power stations around the country. In fact, Jacinta Allen, the Victorian Premier, has turned around and said today that this extreme weather has resulted in the physical collapse of 6 transmission towers, which have caused power outages across Victoria. A massive surge was caused, and this has tripped the power station. As these are extremely big machines, they have to be brought back online slowly and carefully to protect the network, and currently 500,000 people, as it was this afternoon, are without power. Now, there's a few little tricks in this. Of course, extreme weather means every time there is a storm, every time there is a bushfire, every time there is hail, apparently it's all to do with climate change. These people believe that if Australia did everything that the Greenies want, then somehow the weather would change. Well, of course, we're part of a global ecosystem, and while China is able to continue to have 30% of emissions, and remember, they can double them every single day between now and 2030 before they even start getting held to some sort of account, the reality is that Australia is not going to be able to change the weather. But the politics that people like the Victorian government have been pursuing for a long time, which is that the power system that works, well, they are currently being undermined, literally blown up at times, as we move our way towards a new system of power. But so often we hear that a coal-fired power station is going to be blown up, and what will it be replaced by? Storage, not the production of energy, but instead batteries. Now, this is all well and good, but as anyone will tell you, we are nowhere near having the grid to replace the one that in part people like the Victorian government and private power companies have been blowing up for way too long. I hope the situation is resolved as soon as possible, and certainly if you're somebody who's watching us on mobile devices or listening to us through all the different ways you can do it, or of course going through the Sky News app, and you're able to do that off battery power, I hope that you're able to charge something sooner rather than later. If there's a big change this hour, we will tell you. But I tell you what, the one thing that does need to change is the attitude of those that have undermined a grid that didn't survive today, and it's nothing to do with climate change. I always talk about how the Queensland government in particular is a government that is very well practiced at spin, very well practiced at having a very tight relationship with most of the media. Now, there are some good people, of course, but most of the media that exists in Queensland. Why? Because they've been the government, with the exception of 3 years, more than, 10 years ago. For the best part of 30 years, it's been the Labor Party in control of Queensland. So the media, generally speaking, doesn't like to take on the government because, for many people who work in the media, their career plan is to one day work for the government. Literally, people who covered the last state election now work for the current government. The people who covered the previous election now work for the government. The people who covered the one before that now work before the government. So you get the point. So there's plenty of influence that's able to come from the people inside government to the people who will potentially one day work for government. It's not as it seems. Maybe the problems that seem to be the case are not as bad as they seem. But when it comes to health, we all know what the problem is in Queensland. We have a horrific system of health at the moment, and particularly the question of ambulances. Now, I've told you about people in regional areas where they've literally been told if a member of the public who is with the person who is sick could drive the ambulance because the ambulance only has one paramedic. I've told you about the record number of ambulances that are unavailable to the rest of the public when you call 000 because they're waiting out the front of a hospital because the people in the back of the ambulance can't get into the hospital bed. And as we know, there have been examples of people that have died because of the delays, dysfunction, and the horror show that is the Queensland health system, particularly the access to ambulances and particularly the performance of hospitals. Well, Shannon Fentiman, who wanted to become the Premier, but of course was done over by Stephen Miles, so she was rewarded with staying where she is. Well, her and her people have decided that one thing they would like to deny the people of Queensland in the lead up to the election this year is the proof of how bad the system is. Put simply, you know how we talk about the data, how we show the data, how we compare this year with last year and the year before and the year before and the couple of years before that? Well, according to the Courier Mail, huge story there in Brisbane today, and well done to Chris and the team at the paper, that apparently there's been some attempts to fiddle with the data that you're not able to go that far back in history. So when the minister says everything's amazing today, you're not able to double check what happened last year, the year before, or a few years before that. Let me read along here. Despite Health Minister Shannon Fentiman's repeated assurances about more transparent hospital data, emails, texts and slides which have been obtained through the Right to Information Act reveal instructions to, quote, remove historical graphs and insert new parameters to ensure that graphs and data displayed are only from December 2020. So you only have data from 2021, 2, 3 and now 4. You're not able to see how bad it's been for the 4 years before that, for the 4 years before that, before the 4 years before that. Put simply, for the entirety of the run of this government. One Queensland Health slide contains an email about 2 weeks before Ms Fentiman's budget estimates appearance and noted the changes would be needed to review the existing narrative. You mean the reality that the system is crap? Ms Fentiman apparently told the Courier Mail that Queensland Health had sought to redesign its hospital performance website in line with her commitment of providing greater transparency and accountability on health data. They're getting rid of the data so you can't compare the reality of hospitals under these people versus the spin that they will put out in an election, which is vote for us because our hospitals are awesome. More consumers than ever before are seeking information to make informed decisions about their health care. This woman is referring to citizens and patients and people in the back of an ambulance as consumers. Like when you call 000, you can shop around to find a different paramedic to be able to take you to a hospital. And if you're lucky enough to get the ambulance will then have to wait longer than it has ever had to wait in the history of modern Queensland to get into a hospital. This is the same minister who was more than fine with a system where the outpatient system meant that you were taken out of hospitals on the Gold Coast and sent to hotel rooms at SeaWorld. Beware the spin. It is thick and fast with these people, and particularly thick and fast in Queensland. I said it 4 years ago, I will say it again. This mob has to go. Their type of politics has to go. Their use of public funds needs to go. Their focus on spin rather than results must be punished. It's in your hands, and if you have the chance to vote in Queensland, anything but the current mob. And the Greens, of course. Now, I want to take a quick break because I want to have a longer conversation with two people who I know are particularly fired up. They're going to be fired up about this poll as well that says no matter how much the political class talks about taxes, half the country has no idea what's coming, which might mean the Prime Minister is not out of the woods yet. We'll get to both of them straight after the break. Glad you're watching. Nigel Farage in a few minutes' time. Tomorrow night, the wonderful Megan Kelly. Thursday, Dave Rubin. But we've got so much to talk about with these two. They're just here to help. None other than the Senator from New South Wales, Holly Hughes, who is right now in Canberra and just here to help from Victoria each and every time. And didn't he try to help on Bolt Show the other night? I'll tell you what about it. Change the subject, change the subject. He was in full Conroy mode. You're not going to get away with that here. Andrew's too polite and I'll put you back in your place. But can I say to both of you, right? Now, obviously, 75% of people our age couldn't give a stuff about Taylor, but, you know, former senator, well-connected bloke. Have you been able to get tickets for friends? Have you somehow been able, you know, Mr. Melbourne, have you been able to squeeze one out?
Look, I confess, pre-COVID, got tickets for the family, my daughter of 13 at the time, but at 17, 4 years later, she really wasn't interested in going to see Taylor with her dad.
Good.
I'm not taking it personally. She went online. I remember the chaos all day while they were tap, 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 tap. And her and a few mates are off to see Taylor on Saturday night, but Dad's not invited.
Yeah, let me guess though, she was using that special NBN that only former communications ministers get, the guarantee you're in the front of the queue, all right?
I'm still on the dog copper, let me tell you. I'm still on the hopeless copper.
All right, big shout out to the guys.
Malcolm made sure of that.
Yeah, didn't he just? Holly, you've got a teenage daughter. You know, have you been able to find a way?
Well, I can tell you, I was sitting in an airport and I had my phone and my laptop and my iPad going, trying to get on, sitting in a Tasmanian airport. Did not succeed.
Oh, good.
But a girlfriend of mine, I did not succeed, but a girlfriend of mine called me and told me that she had some extra tickets. Oh. But my daughter, who is 16,
was your girlfriend
has told my husband he may be surreptitiously poisoned if he tries to come with me rather than me taking her.
All right, well, enjoy.
I did explain to her, explaining to him surreptitiously poisoning him. It was a bit obvious now, but
yeah.
My daughter
I'll
is
give you the
dead
tip.
set
You've said
that
it on
she
television.
is coming with me.
You've said it on television, okay? The crime investigation.
It's not me. I didn't do it. Love you, Rich.
We love you, Rich. Don't worry. Anyway, 75% of people our age couldn't care less, right? And a much higher proportion of many of the people watching. All right. So let's talk about what's been happening today. Obviously, either you're living it or certainly know plenty of people that are right now about the blackouts across Victoria, Stephen. But can we also be honest here, which is this is, you know, a scenario where, yes, it's been a very difficult day when it comes to the weather, but Victoria in particular has been a place that has tried to put the cart before the horse of replacing the types of things that would be able to weather storms like this. That's true, right?
Look, no question, some of the decisions to shut down Hazelwood and others earlier than it was originally planned have meant that in moments like this, there is more of a shortage than there probably needs to be. But if you look at the pictures, Paul, and I'm sure you have, there have been some, you know, massive pylons buckled over by the strength of this storm. It was extraordinary. I was sitting in my home and I had not seen the trees and the brush fencing bent over like some of those pylons you've seen ever before. So it was a pretty horrendous day, and I can understand why it created extra problems. And we've got still, I'm not sure if it's still 500,000. Hopefully it's less by now and decreasing rapidly. But it was extraordinary weather. Yeah, I mean, literally, you went from weather that produces bushfire to hail all in the space of a couple of hours. So no doubt, plenty of stress on the system. But again, these things just are a warning to us, right? Now, as you know, Holly, the public service
are the ones that are currently being told to leave early and turn this off and turn that off, and they're trying to load shed as much as they can there. In places like Queensland, as we've talked about via smart meters, 600,000 people's air conditioning was remotely turned down in order to save power. And again, while the transmission lines is a big part of the question, where our power comes from, particularly in a place like Victoria that has celebrated, and private companies have been involved with this too, but have celebrated the transition from out with the old, in with the new, but the new hasn't been built yet.
The new's not ready at all. I mean, we're actually in Senate estimates this week, and we had energy and climate yesterday morning. Now, we know Chris Bowen famously said that we need 22,000 solar panels per day and we need 40 wind turbines per month if we are to get to this target that he is desperately chasing of 82% renewables. It is not going to happen. I have consistently asked the department, well, you know, he said this back then. How many have we got? Because we need 66 million solar panels by 2030. We are nowhere near that, but there is this race to shut down coal. Victoria, I mean, gas is a dirty word. It's just insane. There is absolutely nothing coming into our grid that is going to firm it, that is going to provide affordable and reliable energy. And I think, unfortunately, if we continue down this path of ideology and zealotry without being brave enough to even mention the word nuclear, which could provide renewable, emissions-free and very reliable power. But if we race down the wind and solar and that's it, these blackouts, I think Australians better get used to them because they're going to be a real feature of the future.
Yeah, just double check the detail. It's still 530,000 homes that are currently affected, right? So we're still right in the worst of it here. So again, if you're watching us via whatever battery-powered device, thank you for doing so. We'll obviously give you the info as it rolls on. Now, let's talk here again about one of the main features that's playing out in the Parliament right now, where at the end of last year, the government was in all sorts of a mess because they did not have the adequate response to the decision of the High Court to release one person who was the pedophile, but the assumption was that the rule for one is the rule for all, so they all have to go out. Now, of course, we're being drip-fed information, and when people are being kept in detention, pretty easy to know how many and who and why, but that was all kept away. A bunch of legislation goes back and forth, pinging back and forth with the government trying to pretend that at one point the opposition leaders protecting pedophiles, all this garbage. Well, of course, we now know that under the laws that the government introduced, not a single application has been made for any of the people who came out to go back in. And understandably, Giles, who is the immigration minister, has got nothing, and we learn about it day after day after day. Roll the tape. Do you trust this bloke with your national security?
Can the minister now tell the Australian people how many of the 7 murderers and 37 sex offenders released into the community by the Albanese government are not wearing ankle bracelets?
What we heard in Senate estimates was a detail of the relentless effort that has been made by the government since November last year to maintain the safety of the Australian community.
So, Andrew, if the safety of the community matters, had not a single piece of paperwork been filled out to try to use the laws that the Parliament had passed, the Governor-General had done into assent and are the law of the land?
Sorry, Stephen, you mean?
Sorry, Stephen. Sorry, my
said
apologies.
Andrew.
Sorry.
Yeah.
No, sorry.
I thought you were making a statement there.
I'm still thinking about your spin around.
Yeah, no, so was I. I was just waiting what they... So, look, I mean, we can't ignore why we're in this mess. We're in this mess because Peter Dutton and the former coalition government passed legislation which they were told at the time, it's just a fact, were told at the time will not survive a High Court challenge. The High Court then makes
Didn't this government say that they thought it would survive the challenge?
Knocked over. Well,
yes, they
at the time, there were plenty of people, legal experts, who said that it would not survive a challenge. Everyone hoped that it would, because it was necessary.
Well, that was the government's position.
The test. Then Holly and gang go, you've got to pass legislation on the next day. I'd have been in Parliament. Just one small problem with that. The ruling and the reasons for the ruling weren't produced for a couple of weeks. And those are very
Stephen, you're
important
rewriting
rulings
history as we speak.
Sure, let's imagine
I'm
everything
not
you just said
rewriting
is true.
history.
Why haven't they
No.
filled out a
I was
single
there,
application
Stephen.
to
You
put
wanna
someone back?
So
This is an
the coalition
absolute
said,
joke. The Labor
"You've got
Party
to
is
pass.
tying
You've got
themselves
to
in
pass
knot
this
to pass the buck
immediately."
here.
Okay, so the law...
And so, no, because this is just a factual history, which is important.
Mate, you
context.
clearly are a Taylor Swift fan because you are doing some performance art here that's extraordinary.
He's shaking it off.
The rules that they have... Taylor Swift. The rules that they have implemented, the High Court said, draft your legislation based around this. Unfortunately, they're quite stringent in what would be captured. So my assumption as a non-lawyer, Holly, you might be able to help me. My assumption as a non-lawyer is that murderers and probably sex offenders are captured. And so what Andrew Giles has kept explaining is the government are working to try and enforce that legislation. They want to pass the regs or whatever that legal process is. And I'm sure we would all like to see it being done faster. Yeah, but at the moment, that's where we're at.
But Holly,
you
I
can't
get it,
just
right?
pretend the
couple
past
of days
didn't
off for
happen.
Christmas. Couple of days off for Christmas. We all know that, you know, plenty of public servants, if they're not working from home, they are already implementing the please don't call me when it's after hours, all right? But I can still come up with a few working days when they could have made an application under their own law.
Well, please don't call me Andrew Giles because I'm too busy filming an ad in London for the Voice campaign when Home Affairs did have concern about the NZYQ case. Now, Stephen, I was sitting in the Senate chamber, so crazy first-hand view of what happened. And when NZYQ the decision was handed down, Murray Watt was acting as he was representing the Attorney General in the Senate because it was a Senate-only sitting week, and he was asked a question by Nick McKim as to when the Greens, as to when NZYQ would be released.
What a fascinating debate that would
Murray
have been
then
to watch.
stood up and said, "No one will be released until the High Court hands down their reasons." The next day, Murray had to come into the Senate and go, "Oh, oops. Actually, we've just released, I think at that stage was 37, because they declared they had to do it in direct response to the High Court." So that is a complete fallacy that the next day there was all this legislation. We were asking for legislation that we had stupidly assumed, having been a party of government, that this party of government been warned that, you know, we think it might be okay in the High Court, but just in case it's not, here's your plan B. Fortunately, due to the Voice campaign and all the distractions that Claire O'Neill and Andrew Giles had, there was no plan B. So Richard Marles, because he was acting Prime Minister because Albo was overseas again, he all of a sudden went, wow, we need to do something about it. He gave pieces of draft legislation to the coalition at 7:15, 7:30 one morning. The coalition with Mr Dutton went back and said, yeah, but I think we need to look at a few of these different things, including putting some mandatory terms in if they breach conditions of the release, etc. Miles went, great, we'll take these. They then said, we will go draft it though. So we told them some ideas of what they needed to do. They then drafted us. We worked with them to get it passed, but this was the ALP's legislation they had drafted under Acting Prime Minister Richard Marles.
So why do you think they are not applying to use their own laws?
Well, this is the great question.
Because
why
those laws,
have they not used their own laws? And if there is a problem with those laws, Stephen, where are the amendments? They could get through some massive IR reforms last week when they guillotine debate, when they get the vote of Pocock and Thorpe and the Greens, they can jam that through. They don't even bother to read those amendments because now they've got to walk them back because employers could be jailed for contacting people out of hours.
Correct.
But, you know, don't worry about fixing up the detention of 37 sex offenders and 7 murderers because they were on the beach over
just
summer.
unpack what Holly's saying there.
Okay.
So let's just unpack here, so for historical accuracy, and you might have been sitting there, so you are an accomplice in this debacle, Holly, because when you demanded in those first
Seriously,
few days,
you guys are
after
the
the High
government.
Court,
Own it.
you
Stand up.
demanded legislation. Okay, people said
But we're
we shouldn't
dancing-
do it until we see the reasoning.
We said
or
something
the
needed
ruling.
to be done
because
so these people were re-detained.
yes.
They were doing nothing.
Save some in the tank. I've got other topics,
What you
King.
want? No. What happens is
Stephen,
you're not
for the
passing more
sake of
legislation that
Australians,
will
I
get
want
knocked
the
over.
power in your
That
area
will
to go
get
out.
knocked over. They will get knocked over again.
Stephen,
Okay, so let's be clear.
Please.
You
They
didn't
are the
even wait. You
government.
demanded legislation without waiting to see the
Everyone's
reasoning.
fault, no one's
The court then
responsibility.
said, here's the reasoning you should
Seriously, is
use.
anything
Draft
ever
legislation
your fault?
along this line.
All right, okay. Now, let's talk
You're
about...
like a spoiled 3-year-old toddler, but I didn't do it. It was their fault. When will you take some responsibility as a Labor government?
All right.
This is just getting embarrassing.
Okay, I want to talk about tax because I was fascinated, apart from the Taylor Swift poll information that was out there today, about a little reminder, and it is a reminder to the political class in all of its forms, which is that the majority of Australians have heard, apparently, very little or know nothing at all about the tax cut situation. So all of the broken promise conversation, all of the this is the solution to cost of living, which was the briefing to the backbenchers, again, the polling, can we whack it up on the screen here, showing that, the best part of 53% of people saying that they know little or nothing about the tax. 13% of people know nothing at all. 40% of people know hardly nothing. Now, what's also interesting here is that the same polling turns around and says about creating a fairer tax system. 41% of people basically say there's no difference. Keeping taxes low, 43% of people say there's no difference. And use the money from taxes effectively, 41% of people say there's no difference. So I just get to a little political question here, which is if we believe the Laura Tingles of this world, genius move, sold, everyone loves it, right? I've always argued that once they actually turn up on July the 1st, people will either not notice or will notice that $14 a week is a little too late, Holly.
Absolutely. And I mean, they might not know about these tax cuts, and by the time we get to an election, you're exactly right, the cost of living pressures will not have been ameliorated by $14 a week. But look, maybe cat out of the bag here. I don't think anyone's going to be second-guessing it terribly much. We have the Prime Minister on over 100 occasions saying that he was not going to change Stage 3 tax cuts. My word is my bond. You don't think that's the ad campaign with every broken promise this bloke's delivered? The $275 coming off your power bill, there'll be no changes to superannuation. And just, don't hold your breath, guys. Negative gearing, it's coming next.
So Stephen,
they might not care about the tax cut by the election, but they'll care about the broken promises because you cannot believe a word this bloke says.
But again, Stephen, for those of us that are, counting the grains of sand on the beach like we do in this conversation, or the people in the bubble that are trying to tell you that, it's not as many as you think, or it's not really a beach, it's really a rainforest. Good little reminder, right? The vast majority of people, for obvious reasons, are busy and doing something else, right? It's not because they're dumb, but even when there's as much noise and as much coverage, even non-contentious, like sales job coverage, if half the country's got no idea, then I think the people inside the Labor Party who think we've won this one might need to just realise they're going to actually have to prosecute this a little harder than just winning over the gallery that was already cheering them on.
Yeah. No, look, I would expand the Canberra bubble to include the Sydney media and Canberra politicians bubble. Yep. Okay, no, so we call it in Hollywood.
The Victorian bubble.
It's called, well, that's because the media's run out of Sydney.
Well, that's because they can't turn the
vomit
lights on.
principle.
The vomit principle,
yeah,
yes, you keep going until people go, yeah, correct.
It takes about 12 months of saying something over and over again until you're ready to vomit when you hear it again. It's just about then that the average Australian begins to register it. Now, some big issues can cut through. Holding the hose can cut through. But in general, it's why I think I said last week, the poll that we talked about, Paul, doesn't really matter because I don't think it factors in a full knowledge.
Correct.
And what the Guardian poll today said correct. Most people still don't really know. Just because we talk about it, and Paul, you hammer issues and themes over and over again because you know you've got to keep reminding people
100%.
Before it becomes part of in the back of their mind. They can feel it in the back of their mind. So I
Message
think the poll
discipline, my friend.
today showed nothing new.
I know
Message
the principle,
discipline.
Stephen.
Hence why, Holly, too
I
little,
understand
too
the
late.
political
Too
principle,
little, too late.
But what I
too
think
little,
people
too
will
late.
remember is the
14
lightness
bucks.
of their back pocket. No, but people, they might not hear it, they might not remember it. And Stephen, I know the principle you're talking about. When we're sick of saying it, people are just starting to listen.
Right.
But what people will know, if they're not listening, that their wallet's a lot lighter, that their standard
100%.
of living has significantly declined, that their mortgage is more expensive, their groceries is more
but
expensive, their
you're
insurance
putting the
is more
cart
expensive,
in
their
front
energy
of
is
the
more
horse.
expensive.
You're putting the
Well, no, but
You're putting
they
the
may
cart
not,
in
but they
front
know
of the
what's
one I wanna
horse.
get
Netflix
to,
and not
because
the
they
news,
already
but they
know.
know what they can pay for.
Because we are a national show and there is a state that's about to have an election. We don't know what the date will be, presumably announced tomorrow. The Rockcliffe government, which is a minority government and has been teetering for some time, well, the Liberals there have decided, bugger it, we're going to go off and have another election. Now, for Labor, they, of course, think, oh, well, you know, we're going to win because this thing's been a bit of a mess. The problem is it's the same opposition leader who's been rejected twice with policies that were rejected twice that's now going to turn around and pretend, oh, they don't count anymore. But so we'll see how this goes. But of course, Tasmania has been kinder to the Liberal Party of recent years than the mainland has been. They've won majorities twice. They've lost those majorities twice through a whole bunch of internal ups and downs. So, Stephen, are we about to go all red everywhere, or, as what I've just mentioned, is perhaps the reason why not?
Look, I'm obviously hopeful that Labor can go the clean sweep, but in an act, I think it will apply in this election. I'm not absolutely sure, but I think it will apply. They have expanded the parliament. They have actually, to use the phrase, they have reduced the quota. This means, for instance, Jackie Lambie's party could win a couple of seats. The Greens will win more seats. So I think this was an act of political self-harm that they decided to expand the parliament, reducing the quota, creating an almost Senate style. You can have 10 crazies on the cross bench. Yeah. So I don't think either party's primary vote, to win a majority, your primary vote's normally got to be in the high 40s in that style of electoral system. Bearing again, it's a different system to the rest of the country for the lower house. So you've got a situation where I suspect neither party will have a majority, and then it's going to come down to who gets elected in the crossbenches and who are they willing to support. And it's just too soon to make a call on that.
Correct. All right, well, we'll watch more over the next couple of days. Alas, we spent a little time in the history wars, so we'll get back to the more modern conversation next week. Thank you, Holly. Thank you, Stephen. See, he didn't get away with what he did with Bolton. I love, come on. When he tries to change his subject, you can see it in his eyes. All right, now don't forget, we've got Nigel Farage coming up straight after the break. You know how to stay in touch, which is paul@skynews.com.au. Thanks for watching. There is no freedom fighter in the world like the wonderful Nigel Farage, who joins us each and every Tuesday here on Paul Murray Live. Lovely to see you, great man. How's London today?
London is good. Politically, very confused. We've got the sort of sectarian Muslim politics growing in Britain at the moment, which is making Labour scratch their heads. Very interesting.
Yeah, fascinating to watch, isn't it? Now, let's talk about the farmers' protests, which have been growing all over the place, and it seems that our farmers are the bravest to actually take on governments, and it's going to happen in the UK.
Yes, my home county of Kent, from which sprung the Peasants' Revolt of 1381, I'm pleased to say. And it was Kent farmers blocking the port of Dover on Friday night and making quite similar demands to those that are being made. And you've seen the pictures of Paris and what's happened in the Netherlands and Germany. All this net zero stuff, all this we're going to save the world stuff, all this let's make the poor pay and let's put regulations on farmers, and let's stop them farming cows because what comes out of the back end is methane, and that could kill us all. Ultimately, it is small farmers saying, we can't scratch a living, you are trying to drive us out of business, up with this, we will not put. It's fascinating.
Yeah, my oath, it's amazing to watch. And also we know that Marine Le Pen has had many cracks at trying to become the President of France, but a new poll says that she is a chance this time around. Do you think it is going to happen, or, as always, at the last minute, something sort of melts away?
No. I've said for the last 10 years, consistently, I've said at the last 2 presidential elections, Marine Le Pen will become the President of France. And with, as with most of my predictions, everyone laughs and says that Farage, he's an absolute nut job. But I'm very good at looking into the future. And what you see with Marine is every time she stands, her vote share goes up 5%, 6%. Every time she stands, the party builds a more solid base, a more solid platform. And yes, I genuinely think she is going to win the next French presidential election, which on cultural issues will be a good thing. Trouble with Marine is her economics are amongst the most left-wing I've ever seen in the Western world. She's big state, high tax, but when it comes to the identity of France, when it comes to the World Health Organization or the European Union making decisions that affect all of our lives, on that, she'll be very, very strong indeed. And it's happening. It's happening right across the Western world. We are seeing a resurgence of real conservative thinking, moves to the right, new political parties. It's happening everywhere, apart from, at the moment, the UK, though there are some signs that reform is making progress, and Australia, where somehow, I don't know what it is, but the Liberal Party seem to be somewhat asleep.
Yeah, very true. Now, a colleague of yours, Patrick Christie's, who's a very talented young bloke on GB News, people see him here in Australia in frequent conversations with Andrew Bolt. Now, he's come out and publicly talked about how, until very recently, he was drinking too much, that he is an alcoholic, and it's the conversations that he had with you, a fatherly figure who basically gave him the kick in the backside that he required, that helped him begin the process of treatment. What's the message that you would give to the people maybe watching us right now who think, I drink a lot, but I'm completely in charge here, I'm okay?
Well, I'm probably the best known drinker in Britain. I mean, there's hardly ever been a newspaper photograph published of me without me holding a pint somewhere in a pub. So, everyone thinks I'm this sort of giant boozer. Well, the truth is that we all have to build our own relationships with alcohol. And some of us are capable of doing it, and some of us are not capable of doing it. I would say to anybody watching this programme who might think they're drinking too much, give up for a week. Stop for a week. See how you feel on days 3, 4 and 5. And if you feel roughly okay, then you haven't got a major problem. If you're going through serious withdrawal symptoms, you have developed a dangerous dependency. Patrick's case was much more serious. Patrick wasn't drinking socially, Patrick was drinking privately. He was drinking, I might be honest with you, he was drinking in the dressing room of GB News, often starting in the morning, and then hiding the bottles under loose paper and stuff. And I could see from his behaviour, I could see from his weight what was going on. I, having worked in the City of London in the 80s, saw many people destroy their lives with drink. Many of them die very early. I've known Patrick for many, many years, since he was a youngster. So, yeah, I was able to give him some, when I say fatherly advice, I mean, I was pretty blunt with him, Paul, more than once. And if I've helped that young man to turn his life around, then I'm delighted. And he is, I tell you something, he is going to go on to be a broadcaster of epic proportions. Yeah. And he's realised his relationship with alcohol was unhealthy. It can never be healthy. He's got that gene that makes him an alcoholic, and it's great to see him where he is. And he's also getting married later this year to Emily, who's delightful. I'm thrilled for him.
Yeah, she's a cutie. Now, look, again, that's a great act as a friend and as a colleague and a very decent man. That's why we love talking to you. Thank you very much, Nigel. We'll see you again next week. Nigel Farage in the United States. He's part of GB News, which you can find on the Flash app. Just go looking for flashnews.com.au. That's our show for tonight. Thank you very much for watching. Megan Kelly, the big star tomorrow night. Plenty of debate as well. But right now, the late debate.